Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on Unit 4 today, which covers Chapter 4 in our book. And as you can see from my screen, that we will be venturing now into more visual aspects of web development, including graphics. So we're going to start introducing images to our web pages, which is very exciting, and more CSS skills and more structural skills on HTML. So kind of like really moving it up a couple of notches. There's some other topics here as well, but the at least the initial videos here are going to focus more on the Chapter 4 content and demonstration of that. So before we get into the mode of coding, I want to do a little bit of file management. And I always start here, and I'm in the habit, right, when I do work, and I talked about this last time, that wherever I store my work and I walk away from it for a while and then come back to do more work, that I have a methodology for versioning my work. So last week we finished Unit 3. This week we're moving into Unit 4. So I'm going to take this Unit 3 folder, which has all that stuff I was working on here, and I'm going to right click and copy it, and then right click and paste it, and then I'm going to rename it and call it Unit 4, right? So now Unit 3 is still intact, right? And if I completely screw up what I'm doing in Unit 4, I can step backwards to Unit 3, right? So now I have a version. If you're not comfortable that it's actually there, go in there and then open up the folders and check it for yourself. Now, the zip that I copied over, that I don't need, because that should probably be a new file for this week. And then, I have a pseudo folder for a case study that I'm not actually working on. You guys are working on case studies. I don't, right? I grade the case studies. You guys work on them. All right. So I have all my stuff in here. My CSS files, my HTML pages are all set. And now I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. And I'm also going to give you guys kind of another little thought here, by the way. And that is that as I move forward into the future here, I might start switching tools, right? And I want you guys, Visual Studio Code's a great product. It is not my IDE of choice for web personally. And I want to start exposing you to other tools, because there is no correct answer for what tool is best for you. Like, do you like Nikes, or do you like Adidas, or do you like Pumas, or do you like New Balance, or what sneakers are best for you? Well, it depends on your feet, doesn't it? So tools that you code with are the same way. And you do get comfortable and like certain features of ones and don't like other features of others. For right now, I'm going to stick with this product because I know most of you are using it, but I think by the time I get to next week, I'm going to be switching modes with a lot of intent. And I'll do a whole little spiel, and maybe we can even get to it tonight on like what products to check out that are pretty cool. All right. So here in the little Explorer bar, I'm going to make sure that I open up that folder I just created. So I'm going to make sure that I go to the same spot in my file structure. It's going to be different for everybody. I have my way of working. Hopefully you have your way of working. And I'm going to be working in Unit 4. The project folder is where I'm focusing my attention. So I'm opening up that whole thing. So there's all my files. These are all copied from Unit 3. Right. The other thing I'm going to do preemptively is, we're going to be coding and working on the pages, and we're going to be looking at them. So I may as well just at least open the home page in the browser. And then when I make a change, I just hit refresh and I'm all set to go. All right. So this is where we left off last week. So I'm all loaded up and ready to, rock and roll, as they say. I'll open up my index file here. I'm going to also, I guess, open up my style sheet. There we go. I want both of them open, not just one. And then we're going to go back into the core shell here, and I am going to grab the PowerPoint here and roll off of that. And that is not the PowerPoint. That is the PowerPoint. And I'm going to download it and run it locally here. All right, so working on chapter 4 here, learning outcomes from the author. I'll let you just kind of take a quick look at all that stuff. This is the stuff that's in the chapter. You can see we start getting into what I think are some little bit more interesting and advanced CSS skills. Um, we will learn about other color formats, including the very important RGB and RGBA. And we'll look at some HTML elements really, really quickly and briefly, like including some of the ones on this screen here. And then look at some of their design practices. Where they start the chapter is really kind of in a weird spot, and I'm not sure why they included it in this chapter and not somewhere else. But there's this weird tag called the HR tag, which is kind of like the BR tag. And they call it a horizontal rule element. And what it does is it creates a line on your web page like that. And so let's try that. Okay, so first I got to figure out where, if anywhere, that would look good on my page. And I think, normally I guess they're kind of putting it right above the footer, but I already kind of have my footer separated. So I might just find maybe a little bit better spot for it here. I don't know. I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to put it right in the middle, right above this UL is what I'm going to do. You don't have to put it in the same spot, but I do want you to try it. So I'm going to drop mine in right here. I'm just going to do a simple HR. This is one of those that does not have a closer, by the way. If you were working in XHTML mode, you would do it like this, but we're not. So we do it like this. And generally speaking, when you're working with this tag and you drop a horizontal rule in, it will fill the entire horizontal space of the space it has available to it, unless you specify otherwise. Interestingly, and I don't know if you could see a use for this, but this can be useful if you want to make like little dividers in your stuff. I mean, this is kind of a nice tag. You can also style this tag so you can make it different colors, different thicknesses. You can put like drop shadows on it. You can actually even pump images into it if you wish. I'm not a huge fan of doing that stuff. I don't use this one a lot, but when I do like simpler HTML, I think it is kind of a nice way to create a divider. So that's a horizontal rule. So make sure you give that one a try at least. I think that'll probably be added to some of the case studies. All right. Next one, and this is where I think it kind of gets a little interesting, and we start talking about some other concepts here. The one that they're going to start pointing out now is the fact that you can put borders on HTML elements, which is a couple things that we have to kind of latch into first. And that is whenever we put anything on the screen, that stuff that we're putting on the screen sits inside of a rectangular box. Whether we can see it or not, it sits inside of a box. So for example, if I do an H2, let's say this is an H2, and I drop it inside, the wrapper or the container or whatever you're calling your thing, that will start at the left margin and go as far as the words take it, and potentially could fill all the way up to the edge of the screen. Now, if I don't see that, doesn't mean that it's still not occupying that space. A border is kind of useful though, because a border can help to define content and make it kind of look cool. I think this is not a very good example of a place to put a border, right? Because they're putting it around an H2. But there are places where I think it would fit really, really well, right? So let's just kind of do an example here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going back to my page again, and I want to find a spot where I think it's going to look kind of all right. So maybe I would leave it, and this is, kind of maybe a little touchy because I don't see a lot of spots really on my page that I think that it would work, real frankly. However, all right, let's just play with it a little bit just to see. And I have an H2 up here. Let's put a border around it and see what it does. I think I'll probably immediately cancel it, by the way, but I'm still going to do it. All right. So in my style sheet, I do have an H2 style already. So I think I'm going to add it here. And let's just start with this really basic syntax like they're showing here. And this syntax, by the way, is a combined syntax that is controlling actually three different border styles simultaneously. So I'm going to try to attempt to demonstrate all of this all at once, right? So I'm going to start with copying what they have here, though, exactly. And you could do the same thing if you have the PowerPoint handy, or if you have the chat window handy. There it is, by the way. Right, if you don't want to type it, you just want to play with it. I'm dropping that in my H2 tag. So I'm going right here and pasting that in. I am going to put a semicolon at the end of it. This is going to look very ugly, right? A red border around an H2, not my cup of tea. But here it goes, right? Here's the refresh, and you see what I mean. I'm not feeling it, right? Yeah, that's kind of the demo, right? But here's kind of the second part of the demo, and I think that this is kind of important because when we do a border, this one implies the border width, this implies the border style, and this implies the border color. And instead of doing it like this, by the way, you see I'm commenting it out, I could do it longhand. So I could say border dash width colon 2 pixels. So I'll use all the same settings, right? And then I can say border dash style. I want a solid line. And then border dash color. And then I can pick, whatever darn color I like, right? So if let's just say I pick that one, right? And notice this is putting it in RGB format. We've kind of tinkered with that a little bit. Haven't talked about what it means yet, but we will tonight. So the point is, whenever you start seeing styles that have these like dashes in them, some of them allow you to combine them into one statement. And this is something you kind of learn with experience. And it takes a little bit of practice to kind of recognize it. A border is a really common one where we combine it into one statement. So instead of writing three separate statements, I can write one statement that does all those things, right? So functionally, they're exactly the same.
So could you then use like, because I'm looking at the screen and I'm noticing that like when we have font size and font family, could we do something similar with that then?
In some cases, right? That's probably not the best example, but a lot of it really has to do with how the style is defined, right? So one that's a better example actually is backgrounds. So like here we're doing background color, but
Does it,
background also allows for that. Like we can drop in images, colors, styles, uh, repetitions, all in one statement. We're going to probably get to that soon. Yes, Mark.
now on my personal for the Lions website, I have a background color on my header too, and I'm putting the border color in, but it's not actually making that change. Does the
Okay, you
border?
want to share your screen really quick? Let's just take a quick look. All right. And the first thing I would do is, can I look at your HTML code?
Oh, this is actually I didn't put this on its own style sheet for my
Gotcha.
Lions when I got that on JavaScript from my Java Jam. Uh,
Gotcha.
so I still got to do that for this one.
All right. Let me see the part you're talking about, but I want to see it in your code. So you're trying to basically style line 52.
Header, yeah, yeah, or header two right here. So 24 through 29.
Okay.
You see, I have the background color here, and then I got the border, but
Right. Okay.
it's
So
not it's not making that change right there.
yeah, it's not. Here's the why one, and this is actually a great example because you did the singular border declaration, just the word border, and you
Mhm.
declared a color, but you didn't tell it what the style is, and you didn't tell it how thick it is. So if you click in there with your mouse after the colon, and just can pick a pixel amount, do like try 3 pixels, 3 px,
Do you do space or no? Oh, there goes two
Do a
pieces.
space. And then you can do solid. That's typical for a border. And now you have a color. Now save it and refresh.
Oh, close. All right.
Yes. See, so
Cool.
you need to, in some cases, you need to declare multiple things to make it happen.
Okay.
And so, like how thick the border is, well, that's very subjective. I mean, I don't know, 3 looks okay, right? And I like it better on your page than I like it on mine, right?
The colors look good, right?
Well, the colors look good, but like you already had a white background on that,
Yeah.
so the border fits really nicely on that piece, much better than it fits on mine. So that's a good example. And thank you for sharing the screen on it.
You didn't get that. It's the lion's color. I was trying to throw a little joke in it.
Well, Goff got lucky last week, right? He threw a perfect game, right? He didn't
Yeah,
miss
18
one
for 18.
pass.
And they caught one too.
All right. Let's move forward here, you guys, because we're not going to make this about the Detroit Lions today, if I can help it. All right. So, okay. So, kind of the concept once again, right? So, in a declaration like this is the border width, this is the border style, and then that's border color, right? And very common to combine those, but as I demonstrated, you can separate those, right? And list them each separately if you wish. That works too. There's no rule of which way to do it. People that are hand coding usually go for this approach because they know that they need all 3 of those things anyhow, so they put them in one statement. All right. Now, what's kind of weird, right? When we're doing this on an H2, right, it fills the whole width of the screen, even if there's no text there. If you place that basically on, in other words, the concept is some elements that we put on an HTML page are block level elements. They fill the whole width. Other things are what we call inline elements. And a really good example of that is anchor tags or links. So for example, if I wanted to apply this style, I'm just going to do it for demo. And you guys want to try it for demo too, go for it. But I'm just going to put that right here. So I'm going to take all of my links and I'm going to draw a 2-pixel solid red border around them. I think once again, that will look horrible, but we're doing it anyhow for demonstration. And there it is, right? I would never do this, but here's an example that you can. And the difference, and really what this is about, is notice because these are inline elements, the border stops with the actual item, where this is a block level element. It goes all the way across. This occupies the whole width of the screen. An inline element like a link does not. So it's real tight on the content. Right. So I'm going to remove that one because I don't like it. I don't like the border on my H2 either. And you know what? I'm going to actually find a spot where I think that border looks a little bit better. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm looking at my header, right? I could put a border on the whole header instead of the H2. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's refresh that first. But I got to save it, I guess. All right. Well, one step at a time. All right. Save. All right. So we're not going to put it on the H2 at all. I'm going to strike this, cut it, and do I have a style for my header? I sure do. So I'm going to paste it in here. Red's not going to fly with me. So I'm going to do something I think is a little more tasteful looking, maybe like a deep burgundy. That's kind of okay. And I'm going to make my border a little bit larger. I'm going to go with 4 pixels. I'm going to stick with a solid line, and then I'll show you what the other options are, by the way. So here's the save. And then I'm going back to the page here and doing a refresh. And now notice that's not too bad, right? And I'll check out the border that I have going around my header. That's all right. That works, right? It's a lot more tasteful than just putting it on the H2, at least for me, right? And the other little takeaway from that, by the way, is that when we're encapsulating content, like you guys might have been like, why are you putting heading tags inside of a header tag. Well, now when they're all bundled together, I can style that whole thing together. It can have its own background color, its own border, and its own effects, right? And I can do them all collectively. That's kind of the magic there. All right, so kind of moving on from that concept. Now, the one question you might ask is like, well, if you can do a solid line, are there other kinds of lines I can do? And here you go. Here, these are all the choices, by the way. So the default is no border, or and by the way, you can declare that you can say border default and it'll just do that, or you can say border none to get rid of a border if it was declared before. And then they have the inset, outset that makes it kind of look like which way the light's coming from. They have double lines, a grooved line, a ridged line, a solid one, which is, you know, usually the one I go for, and then the dashed and the dotted. I'm going to tell you, like, you know, 99% of the time, I just go for a solid border line if I'm using one. If I'm doing a website where it's got e-commerce and I want it to look like a coupon, I'll use one of the bottom ones. I'm rarely using any of these, but people do use them. And you know what? It might work for your website, and it might work for your aesthetic. That's on you to choose it. But if you want to see it in action, for example, I could take that line and just change that to dotted, right? Save it, back to the browser and refresh, and there it is. And that looks really hideous, but it proves that it works, right? Now, what I might do aesthetically, you know, and I'm always like, I don't want it to ever look bad as I'm working on it, even when I'm building it. I'm going to go back to solid, and I think I'm also going to bump up the size a little bit. I'm going to be a little bolder with it. I'm going to go 10 pixels, and let's do a refresh. And you know what? That's not too bad. We could try maybe one of those other weird ones like inset. Save it, refresh. Not so much, right? I mean, these are the kind of calls you have to make, and sometimes you really don't know if it looks good or not until you try it, real frankly. Because you might like look at it on as an example, and then you try it on your site, and it's like, oh my God, that's perfect, you know. So don't hesitate to experiment is really the grand point there. All right, this is the one I'm going to stick with though. So that's working with borders. Now, here's the other thing that gets a little bit weird is it's also possible with CSS, and we haven't learned about the CSS box model, and maybe I should probably bring that up. But borders can be controlled individually on each side. So like all the settings that I just did to go all the way around something, I can make individual settings for each side of the border. Like, talk about control, right? So I can make like the bottom one red, dotted, 10 pixels wide, and then the right one green and solid, and the top one grooved and blue. I can do whatever, and I can specify all that. I would just have to append which side it's going to. So this is kind of an interesting effect that you're doing here, which is to selectively just put a bottom border in on something to kind of create another way to have a divider on your page. So here, let me just show this, I think is a silly example here, but what if I just add a little bit of content in here somewhere? And so I might like kind of do a little bit of copy paste, as we say. I am going to do some word wrap here. So I already have a paragraph, and I'm just going to copy this paragraph. And I know this is very redundant, but this is for example, right? But please see if you can follow along here. And if not, whatever. I'm going to get rid of some of these weird line breaks now, because now I'm actually going to start trying to make my page look good. Hopefully, right? And then in between these paragraphs, what if I put in an H2, and I'm going to put a class on it and call it, I don't know, blue bottom, right? That's going to be my thing. And then I'm just going to call it, hey, This is cool, sorta. Dot, dot, dot. Okay. And now I'm going to attach a style to this. Notice how I'm copying it, right? Saving my HTML, by the way. And then where am I going to put that? Well, I'm probably going to put it here with the headers. So that was what, a class? So a class uses a dot or a pound sign? A dot, right? And then my curlies. And then right here, I'm going to put in the style. Let's see, what was the style going to be? We're going to do border dash bottom. And then we'll do, I don't know, I think I wanted to do blue. So let's make it, I don't know, 5 pixels thick, solid line, and blue. All right, so there's the code. And you come back here and do a refresh. So we'll have an extra paragraph. And there's my H2. It's centered. Why is this one centered? Well, because all the H2s are centered. And maybe I don't want that, by the way. So I could right here say text align left. Save it, refresh, and there you go. Or I could be really weird and say text align right. Whatever. But you see, this is kind of another way. You know, this is actually a border, but it sort of looks like one of these horizontal rules. Right. So it's kind of another way you can create like visual separations in your content. Kind of an interesting technique, I think. Right. I'm going to leave that one there for now. All right. Before I get into this padding stuff, I do find it's kind of important to talk about the CSS box model. And at some point, the author does bring it into the readings and up onto the screen through the PowerPoint. But this is something you can also look up. And usually you end up at W3, right? But basically there's this concept here with what we call the CSS box model, that any content that we put on the page, whether it's words or an image or whatever, you know, it's going to be in a container. That container is rectangular. And so if I put words on the page or an image on the page, they'll fit right into like basically the white part of this thing. Now, with everything that we put into the browser window, we can control the spacing and the border around that object. So if I put a border on an object, there's a thing in between the border and the content that we call the padding. So if we add padding to it, it adds space inside the border. If I want space outside the border, I create a margin. The other thing I'll have you notice is that margins, borders, and padding each go all the way around the object, and therefore I can control the top, right, the bottom, the right, and the left all separately or all together. So if I say padding and I call out a pixel amount like 20 pixels, that'll be 20 pixels all the way around. But if I only want to have padding on the top, I can say padding dash top 20 pixels and leave the other ones alone. I can do it selectively, and that's true for all of these. There's a little acronym that I often kind of push on my students, and this is one that you want to start to maybe memorize, right? Because you have top, right? Let's do this with an R. Bottom. And left. All right, and here's what's weird about this. Take the first letters of each one of those. It's top, right, bottom, left, going around it like a clock. What does that spell? Yeah, trouble.
Trouble.
So that's the way, that's how you remember it, right? And so when you are declaring styles or settings for margins, borders, and padding, often what you do is you use these combo statements where you're addressing all of the sides separately. So like you might be, for example, creating a border or let's say padding amount, and you want the top one to be the same as the bottom one and the right one to be a certain thing and the left one to be a different thing, and you declare them in that trouble order, by the way. So that's a good acronym to know, right? And maybe you'll latch onto that, maybe you won't, but you mark my words, there'll be times when you come back to it and you go, oh yeah, he did talk about that, didn't he? Right. And so that's what they do here on the next slide. And I got to get out of that like writing mode. Right. So on this next slide here, they talk about exactly that. So I can declare all the paddings separately. So what they did here with this H2 is they put a different amount of padding. Notice the top and the bottom were 10 pixels and the left was 5 pixels. And you know what? Let's play with that same weird H2 that I just created, but I used a class to style it, right? This one here. And so instead of just doing a border on the bottom, I'm going to do a border all the way around because that way you'll be able to see it, right? The other thing I'm going to do is let's do like a weird background color, something that'll kind of stand out a little bit. All right. And then we are going to go ahead and do some padding. So for example, to mimic what they did, they had padding left. And with the padding left, I think they set it to 5 pixels. So I'm going to set it to 5 pixels. Then they did a padding dash top. And they did like 10 pixels, was it? I think so. And then padding dash bottom was also 10 pixels. Right. I'm going to save this, right? And then I'll do a really quick refresh on it. So don't freak out to the code part of it, because I will come back to it. I just got to find my browser here. Here we go. And now I'm going to refresh. So watch box. There it is. But basically what I did is I was able to control this little area here where you see my mouse moving. That's the left padding. This area on top is the top padding and the bottom padding. And I think what I'm going to do, just to make this a little bit more evident, is I'm going to go into my HTML file here, and I'm going to add to that code there, wherever the heck, oh, here it is, right? Oh, it's right here. All right, sorry. Hey, this is sort of cool, right? And then I'm gonna paste it in a few times because I want to have a little more content to look at. So here comes again, refreshed with more content in it. I'm doing this on purpose, by the way, right? If you noticed, we assigned styles to the top, the bottom, and the left, but not the right. So why aren't we using it on the right? Well, it just so happens, at least how we're looking at it right now, that it doesn't get that close. But I can, and I just wanted to show you, right? If I don't have any padding in there, depending on how wide my screen is set for, my letters could get to the point where they're touching the screen. So that to me is very aesthetically displeasing, right? When you're putting something inside of a box and it's got edges and then the stuff is touching the edges, doesn't look so good, right? So it is very common to control the padding of each individual side to get the exact look you want. All right. Now, what's kind of fascinating about that is they have a few different ways to do it. Now I'm going to go back to that CSS box model one more time, right? This thing, remember, top, right, bottom, and left, trouble in that order, correct? Correct, right? And what they're going to start to point out, and I'm going to skip a slide here and then backtrack, is I can declare all of the padding sizes all at once. Now, this is kind of an interesting approach. And you know what? For the sake of it, I'm just going to copy what they have here. And then I'm going to put it back into my code here, right? Where I did them all separately before. I'm going to comment those out. And then here, I'm doing them all at once, right? So this will be the top, the right, the bottom, the left. right? Top, right, bottom, left, TRVL, trouble, right?
That's
And
cool too if you want to space out your, kind of make everything line up accurately.
yeah, I mean, it absolutely, right? Like if you're really kind of a control freak about like how your stuff looks, and frankly, folks, you should be, right? You want your stuff to look good. I don't think that looks good, the settings that I copied from the slide. But now that I look at it, I go, what? But, like my brain's getting ideas now. I'm kind of thinking like maybe the top and the bottom should be the same, or maybe even the bottom should be bigger. Maybe that could be 40 pixels. Let's try that. Right. Here's the refresh like that. Right. Now, you might look at this and go, that's way too much space. But I'm going to tell you what, as you become a developing coder, you're going to discover that space on the screen is your friend. The more space you put around objects, the more comfortable they become to look at. And I'm not sure if this is refreshing here or not, but I think it refreshed. All right. But I think it looks better with more space around it. It's more comfortable on the eyes, even if you think I'm wasting screen space. If you look at really well-designed websites, you'll notice how designers use space as a tool, right? Sometimes it's the empty spaces that say more than the spaces you're filling, and it's all about the layout. All right, so that's an example of that technique. There is kind of another interesting aspect of this, and that's why I skipped over this slide. If you want, you can also use what they have, what they call a combo statement, where I'm not declaring all four of them like on the next slide. But what happens is you just use two values. And when you just use two values, the first one is top and bottom, and the second one is left and right. And that's pretty common also. You have the top and the bottom the same, and the left and right the same. If I were to experiment with that just to show you, here, I'll just move this comment mark down here, and then we'll just copy the statement and tweak it. And so we could do something like this. And let's say we do, I don't know, 40 and 20 might be interesting. So this would be top and bottom, left and right. Saving and refreshing. Didn't move a lot, but those are the settings, right? So when you use two, top and bottom, left and right. When you use four, trouble, top, right, bottom, left, like going around the clock, right? Or you can just say each one separately. That's fine too. There's no, computer doesn't care. It'll read any of those. There is also a third variant where you use three values, and I forget what the third value is. I think it's like top, bottom, left, right, or top, right, left. I forget, but you'll have to look that one up. I don't remember it because I don't really use it. Normally, if I'm using a technique for padding and declaring separate amounts, I like this technique the best, personally. If this confuses you, it's not a big deal to just spell them out like that. I think that's okay too, as long as it's clear and you know what's up. That's really the important part. All right. They start to go in there now, and they start playing with this quite a bit, right? So they take this H2, they throw in a background color, they change the font color, they choose a different font, they text the line center, bottom border dashed, and then they create this. So this is what they're creating with that code. And by the way, I think we're at a reasonable spot right now to stop and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to start talking about graphics. All right, so let's do a 5-minute break, you guys. We'll come back at 7 o'clock. It's 6:54 right now. So I'll see you in 5. All right, welcome back from break, everybody. And now we're going to kind of switch modes here, where we're talking about the types of graphics that we can actually put on web pages. And what you'll see here is kind of a listing of some file formats that are really popular for the web. And now I'm just going to kind of point this out. Just because something is popular Doesn't necessarily mean it's the right choice, right? But these are the web formats for images that are most common on the web today, right? So the ones that you see the most often. Um, some of you are already familiar with some of these acronyms, but basically, the way that we say these, there's the GIFs, right? And those are, we'll talk about those in a second. JPEGs, which are usually used with digital photography, by the way. PNGs, which are kind of a weird, newer format that a lot of people prefer for a lot of reasons. And then the even newer format called WebP, which is actually kind of like I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly. It's kind of like a universal image container file format that supports all of the other ones within it. And there's not a lot of programs that natively write to that format, but often that format really contains one of the other formats within it. All right, so that's kind of a weird way to explain that one, but that's what I've seen in it, by the way. Let's talk about the first one they have at the top of the list. And this one's kind of like a historically interesting one because it's technically a proprietary format. It came with this weird online service that was around in the early 90s called CompuServe. And I don't know if any of you are old enough to even remember that, or or alive actually even at that time. But before the internet was the internet, we had these closed, what we called bulletin board online systems. You would dial into this service and you would just be on this service. You wouldn't really hit the internet. The people that did CompuServe basically came up with a way to put graphics on the internet that wasn't too memory intensive, and they developed this GIF format, which stands for, by the way, graphics interchange format, right? And the neat thing about GIFs, right, and why people still use them is it is possible, if you're not using a lot of colors in your image, that you can have a very large file that has large in size that doesn't occupy a lot of memory space. It's got a very small file size, but it can be a pretty large image. The other neat thing is that it also supports transparency. And this is kind of a neat feature. So like, this is what they're trying to show here. So for example, if I created an image and I put some white text and I had a background on that image, right? And in other words, the image is not transparent. The background of that image is a solid color, and I would have put it on a web page. Well, I would see the background and I would see the text, right? Assuming that the text is part of the image, right? With a transparent GIF, you can do things like this, where the letters are part of the image, but if I don't have a background, I can allow it to be transparent, and therefore I can see through to the background. And so, for example, and I'm thinking of like your Detroit Lions page, like if you had like a helmet of the Lions and it was a transparent image, we could take that helmet and put it over like a football field or something, and you wouldn't see the square box around it because the background would be transparent, right? So that, yeah. Another kind of interesting thing about the GIFs, right? So, all right, so that's what it stands for, graphics interchange format. It says best for line art and logos. I tend to agree. It does not support a lot of color depth. So if you're looking for a photographic quality image out of a GIF, you're not getting it, right? It's going to look, color gradients, for example, would look choppy, so you can configure it to be transparent. And here's the other cool feature of it. It can also be animated. And a lot of us, when we think about GIFs on the internet, and that's how a lot of people pronounce it, we think of like these goofy little, like 5 slide animation things, it's like 5 quick little images. So that is supported with GIFs too. So they're transparent, low color count, but can be animated. And really, as of late, it's those animated ones that are kind of neat. And you know what? If you want an example, and we can just go here to the web, and I think these are all animated. I'm just trying to find one that's kind of all right, let's go with that one. There you go. That's an animated GIF. And I want you to notice, right? Not a lot of colors. It's what, black, white, and yellow, basically, or whatever you want to call that, mustard color. There's not a lot of animation. It's just a few select images. So that's really kind of a neat thing. For whatever reason, most of the time when you say GIF to somebody, they think of animated images, right? So that's kind of another thing it brings to the table. This one's kind of interesting because notice that whenever you see the checkerboard like that, that means it's transparent. So I could put this on my web page, and if there was a background behind it, I would be able to see that background. So if you want to experiment, okay, I got to do that one, right? Oh, that one doesn't work? Okay. But anyhow, I think you guys get the point. It's probably like Homer getting hit in the head with a donut, I'm sure. All right, let's kind of move on here. All right, so those are GIFs, and you know what, we will play with these, but we're going to talk about the formats first before we actually tinker with them too much. The next file format that is really important is JPEG, and I do want you to notice on this slide they say JPG, and then down on this slide they go JPEG, and formally this is what it originally was, and most people switch it to the 3-letter version, which is just JPG, right? But it's for JPEG. What is unique about JPEGs is a couple things. First of all, they support more of what we think of as a full color palette on the computer. So it supports up to 16.7 million unique colors, right? And therefore it's best for photographs. So like a photograph, and you'll notice, for example, they have a picture here, and this is very selectively chosen on purpose, because if you look at the sky's not one color blue. It's a little darker up here and it gets lighter, and then it's kind of like, I don't know, almost hazy over here. So there's maybe like 30 or 40 different blues in this range. And then you get to the water and you got a whole different range of blues, and the mountains are kind of blue too, right? A JPEG is really good at showing all the different colors. The other thing that it's really good for is it has built-in compression, meaning that we can take an image that's photographic and really, really large and shrink it down and still have it look pretty good and get on the web page. And so whenever you're tending to do photographic images, JPEG is typically the format you want to use. If you took that JPEG image that we saw on that slide and converted it to a GIF, it would look really grainy because you would see like the color gradations in the sky and in the water, because it can't do all the detail of the color. Unfortunately, right, cannot be animated and cannot be made transparent. So those are the downers of a JPEG. But if you got a photograph, JPEG is the one you want, right? And the interesting thing about this, and we will tinker with this as we kind of move forward, is a lot of times when we're pulling images straight off our cameras or our phones, they come in as really, really large files. And for those of you that do any real photography and you're really a purist about it, you might actually have like a nice digital camera that shoots in what we call RAW mode, which will create files that are just humongous. We're talking like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50 megabytes for one single image. That becomes very impractical for putting on a website. So what they're showing here is that a JPEG allows you to adjust what we call the quality, which is really the compression setting. So I can like bring the quality lever down a little bit and then resize it, and then get maybe what might be a huge image originally, like 5 megabytes, 10 megabytes, 20 megabytes, and bring it down to 55 kilobytes. And when we put that on a web page, it still looks really nice and it loads really fast. You never want to go to a website, and I'm sure you guys have seen this. You go to a website and the picture's coming up and it's just like one that's like slowly drawing itself in. That's because that image is way too huge, and even your high-speed connection is taking a while to download it and display it. And if you put like 20 images like that on one web page, you're going to be sitting there waiting for 5 minutes for it to load. But if you optimize your images, and this is something you learned as a web developer, maybe not to be an artist, but how to optimize your image so you can make it really small like this, and then it will load instantaneously, and visually it will still look the same. Right? We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the other format, and this is a little bit newer one, is PNG. And a lot of web developers tend to use this for a lot of different purposes. It does support millions of colors, so it can do photographic quality. However, the compression algorithms within it aren't as efficient as JPEG, so you can't get your photographic images as small as you can with a JPEG and still put them on the screen, right? So I still like JPEGs better for photos. However, it does do animation, and it does do transparency, and often when you're in doubt, like which format to use, this is the one that'll work in almost every scenario, right? But still, as a general rule of thumb, JPEGs are better for photographs. GIFs are better for very simple colors and simple animations. PNG can do both, but I would still use JPEG for pictures. All right, so that's kind of my helpful tip. All right. Then we have this newer thing here, and this is a new format. And I'm not really sure what to say a lot about it because I've not done like any formal research on it, but I know that it does support all the features of the other ones combined. So it does animation, it does transparency, it does high quality compression. And really what I've discovered is often if I get a WebP and I can't open it in a program, sometimes I just change the file extension to like PNG or JPEG and it opens. So I think that's really fascinating. So I'm not sure what the secret sauce is for that, but it's worthy of a little exploration. And I'll put this challenge out there. Anybody here in the session wants to look it up and tell me a little bit about it, we can bring it up here in the session. Otherwise, I'll Google it and bring the information to you. In fact, we can be really goofy about this, right? We're online people. What is the difference between the WebP image format and other traditional image formats such as PNG, JPEG, and GIF? All right, so this is what Google's AI search lab is telling me, and I'm not sure how valid this is, but let's just zoom in on it a little bit. Okay, WebP images are smaller than other formats. Okay, so that gives me some, so 26% smaller than JPEGs. The lossy images, meaning with compression, are about a third smaller than JPEGs. Okay. All right. So I'm not sure. It says it was developed by Google to make the web faster by allowing websites to play high quality images with smaller file sizes. Okay. I'm all about it now, right? Now that I understand a little bit more what it's about. I don't use a lot of software that generates this, but your web browser knows how to work with it. I'm going to guess Photoshop might have tools to convert to it. I'm not really sure, but I'm sure we can figure that out too. But hey, you know what? We had the question. We have the internet, so let's ask. All right, so now we're going to get to the point where we're going to start putting images on our page, but we need to have some images to work with. All right, so here's kind of a really big thing about doing web stuff, and this might not ultimately be your calling, but I discovered when I started doing websites that it was super helpful, at least back in the old days, right? That, before everybody had a smartphone in their pocket, that I go out and buy myself a digital camera. Or I would have a traditional camera where I would do prints and stuff, and then I would have a scanner so I could take those photographs or the slides or the negatives and make an image off of those and get those on a website. One of the problems with grabbing images off the internet, right? And so this is kind of happens a little bit later in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to talk about it now because we have already been playing with it. But Google has an image search area. So if I want, a picture of this is the kind of dog that I have, except mine's black and white, right? So I don't see, She's an unusual one because you can see most of these are not black and white. So we got to spell it right. All right, that gets a little bit closer to what she looks like. And it's really kind of more like that, I guess, maybe even darker. But I can come out to the internet and look up images like this. And this is one of the things that happens on the internet is people put images out there. And so for example, if I like this picture, oh, you notice this person put watermarks all over it, so I can't steal it. But here's the secret sauce of the web, folks. You just go to like, for example, this person's site, you right click, and then you just say save image as, and then I have the image right here and you can see it's a JPEG. And okay, so maybe you guys already know this, or maybe it's completely new information. I'm not really sure, but yeah, you can do this on the internet. You can just go to any image, right click, and save as. Some people get smart, they write some JavaScript that kind of prevents it from happening, but you can still get to the image ultimately. And then I can save it and I can publish it freely, right? And that's okay. The answer is actually wrong. It's not okay. If this image belongs to somebody and there's a copyright, and it says images may be subject to copyright, learn more, you got to be really, really careful with that because Google will also have these tools here and right? So you see click tools and then you go to usage rights. And the only ones that are okay to use for free are the ones that are under Creative Commons licenses. So any of these are okay. But if I went back to, the commercial approach, and you notice as I hover over these, they say licensable. That means I can buy this image from the person who actually shot it. If I go ahead and use it, they can send their team of lawyers after me and sue me and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Send me a cease and desist, tell me to pay money. And why? Because this is somebody's creative property. They took the camera, they set up the lighting, they made the dog smile and everything, and they took the picture and they put it out on the web hoping to sell it and make some money. Right? Doesn't mean that you're free to go in there and grab it. Okay, here's the other reality though. Real frankly, people still will come in here and steal the image. Some people don't block you from doing it. And then other people get really clever, by the way, right? And they break out their snipping tool or their screen capture or whatever, and they just come in here and grab it, and you got the picture of the dog, and now it's mine. Or is it? It's not. So really what I'm kind of leading you guys to, it's not a bad idea to learn how to take some good basic photographs. I mean, the reality is we have our smartphones now, so everybody's walking around with a camera anyhow. You don't need a super high quality camera to get a decent image to put on the web. It helps, don't get me wrong, to have a really good camera, really good lights, and know what you're doing. But you can also get pretty darn good results with pretty lo-fi equipment. That's the reality. It behooves you when you're working on a website, if let's say you have a customer that you're working with and they have a product they're trying to sell and put on their website, maybe they have a professional photographer they can hire, take a really good photograph, or maybe you can just step in and go, you know what, I'll take that picture for you, and then I'll drop it into Photoshop and enhance it or Lightroom it and crop it and style it. Like you can imagine that like this dog is not sitting in a plain white room. It was probably out on a field somewhere and they just removed the background from it. And there you have this, perfect image of a dog, right? And you can do that kind of stuff too. It really is helpful to know how to shoot the photographs if possible. And if you're not the person that knows how to shoot the photograph, often what web developers also do is they take photographs that pre-exist and they tweak them to make them look better on the web, right? So I think what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to begin by doing this on my other screen, right? And this is kind of a personal privacy issue here, is I'm going to go to my Google Photos. So like what I do is whenever I'm out and about and I'm shooting pictures with my phone, I have I think it's my Google Photos app links up to my account, And whenever I get on Wi-Fi, it takes all the pictures off of my phone and uploads it to my Google Drive and my Google Photos account. And then I can look at them in my browser and download them from there. And I don't even have to worry about a camera or whatever. And so I'm trying to find a picture that I maybe took recently here. And okay, so, all right. So I think that I can, there we go. This is pretty safe to put on screen. I don't want to divulge into my personal photographs here, basically. But here's some pictures I took the other day. And in fact, I think this was yesterday. We were walking the dog right up the street here in our neighborhood. And we have this little kind of park arboretum kind of area. And I took these photos because I thought the clouds are pretty remarkable. And so here's one of my pictures. Right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to, this is straight off the camera, no adjustments, no tweaks. In fact, there were probably fingerprints on my lens, because the phone was in my pocket or whatever. And I'm going to just download this from my Google Drive. And then I'm going to find it in my downloads folder. And then I'm going to take this and cut it. And then I'm going to move it over to where I'm doing my web work, right? And I'm going to put it in the same folder that I'm working on right now. And this is in my project folder. But here's my other convention. When I start working with images, I could throw the images right here in the same folder. What is the better practice is to actually create a separate folder and name it what is inside of it, which for me would be probably images is what I would call it. Notice all lowercase, that's my convention. I'll go into that folder and I'm going to paste that file in. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click that file and I'm going to let it open up in the Windows photo viewer or whatever the heck it's called. And then I want you to notice that as I'm looking at it on my screen, which if you're keeping track or score or whatever, my screen is 1920 by 1080 tall. Those are pixels. So 1920 pixels across, 1080 pixels tall. That's full HD, right? If you have a 4K display, it's double that. It's 4,000 across and 2,000 something tall. And right now, as I'm looking at it like this, it's actually only at 21% zoom, right? And you see how much of my screen it's occupying, right? Maybe a quarter of my screen. So if I want to look at this at 100%, and I'm just going to keep zooming in here, right? And so there's 100%. And here's the other thing, that 100% doesn't even fit on my screen. You know what I mean? So this is one of the issues that you get with photographic images is how do you take an image that basically is way bigger than my screen and then shrink it down to be efficient enough to go on a website. The other thing to look at, by the way, is as it sits in my file folder, and I'll do two things. Like first thing I'm doing is hovering over the image. And notice what Windows will do is it brings up a little info box and it tells you what the dimensions are. So that's 4,032 across and 2,268 tall. And this is from an old Samsung S9. It's not even a very high quality camera or phone, right? And look how big the image is. And it's 4.01 megabytes or 4,111 kilobytes. That is way too big for a website, by the way, right? So often what you do as a web developer is when you get raw photographs like this, you have to tweak them. You have to adjust them and resize them somehow, right? And there's a lot of different tools that you can actually use to do it. I'm not sure if this preview tool allows for it. In fact, I don't really think it does a great job of it, but it does have a resize tool here. So I'm going to go ahead and use it. And so I'm going to say resize. And notice it has some presets, right? Best for profile pictures and thumbnails. Okay, so look what it does to it. It takes it down to this size and 695K. It is smaller. Best for emails and messages. That drops it down to about HD level, but it's still 2 megs. Or best for viewing, about maybe a little more than half the native size at 2.7 megabytes. And I'm going to say all of these are still too big for the web. right? So I'm going to define custom dimensions, and notice there's the quality slider here, right? So I can change that. 80% is considered high, but I can go all the way up, or I can bring it way down. I'm probably going to drop it to like 70. And then I think I'm also going to drop the size down to something that makes sense. Because if my screen's 1920 across, I think probably, and then my web page is narrow, and then it might end up on a phone, like you keep like thinking it like it's going to get smaller and smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this maybe 400 pixels across. And notice I have this little box checked here, which is maintain aspect ratio. So what that does, by the way, is it keeps those settings locked together. So if I change the one, the other one changes with it, right? If I uncheck this, then I can change them separately, and I can really ruin the picture, by the way, by doing that. And I don't want to do that at all. So I'm going to kind of reset it, and I'm going to go for 400 across. I think that seems pretty reasonable to me. And I'm going to drop it down to 70%. And then I'm going to save a resized copy. And then we're going to put it back in the same folder. All right. I'm going to give it a different name. So I'm just going to call it, I don't know, X in the sky. And I get really goofy when I do this stuff. And I'll tell you what I often do is I sometimes put the dimensions of the photograph in the file name. I think it was like 400 by something, but I don't really remember. But I'm going to call it -SM. So I know it's a smaller version, like, because when I'm looking at it in the folder, right, I know which is the big one. I know which one's the little one, especially if they have the same file name. I'm probably not going to end up using this one at all, but it's there if I need it. Okay. But the small one is there. Let's open that one up now. And here it comes up, and now it's at 100%. This is what I did to it. Right. Now, if I'm putting this on a web page, I don't want to take up the whole screen. That's maybe an okay size. Maybe I overdid it a little bit. All right. So let's make it let's go a little larger with it. Let's go 800. All right. I'll leave the quality at about 70. And then I'm going to name it the same as this one, but this is a little bit bigger. So maybe I'll call it like medium. And you know what? I should probably go lowercase with it. Medium. We'll save it. All right, let's go see the result of it though. And what I'm looking at here, I want you to notice the file sizes. Look how small the small one is. It's only 16 kilobytes. The medium one is 60 kilobytes. Let's open that and take a look. Here's what that one looks like. And you know what? That's at 100%. That doesn't look too bad, right? If I saw that on a website, I go, oh, that's a nice picture. That's a whole lot different. And I want you to just look at those file sizes again, how much space I'm saving. There's a couple of issues here, right? So when we have high-speed connections at home that are unlimited data, we don't think about what we're downloading because we can just download. It doesn't matter. But knowing that most people on the internet download stuff using their phones, when you throw big files at them like this, you're chewing up their bandwidth. You're stealing their data plan from them, right? If you have nice efficient files that load faster, they probably look just as good. And it's just like quick, right? And you want all of that, right? So now that I have this, now I want to get this on my page. So now I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to try to find a spot where I think it makes sense to put this photograph. And this doesn't really match my topic or theme, but the goal is eventually, yeah, it should. Okay. So I want to find the right browser here, and I want to look at my page before I decide where to put it. So my thinking is maybe I'll just kind of put that photograph like above this weird box and below that paragraph. So that's my target location. All right. So here's that first paragraph, right? Here's that weird H2. All right, I'm just going to make a little bit of space here. Notice I'm just splitting stuff apart just so I can see it clearly. And then right here in this spot, I'm going to use the image tag. So this is how we get images on the screen. So IMG tells the browser that we're loading an image. Next, we're going to use SRC, which will indicate where the source of location of the file is. Now, because I'm working in an images folder, notice I just started typing IM, it found my images folder, and it found all my images, and I'm going to use the medium. And then, believe it or not, this is all it takes at a minimum to get an image on the screen. So I'm just going to save this for a second, and I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh just so you can see that now I have the image on the screen. Isn't that cool? And I'll tell you what, there's nothing more satisfying like doing all the simple stuff we've done so far in this class. And then you get to the point where you can throw cool looking pictures up, especially if you got a topic that you're building, you know, that has lots of photographic material available for it. Oh my God, it really makes you feel empowered, you know, but that's how simple it is to put it on the screen. Now, here's the other part of this that gets a little bit weird. You'll notice that when they're showing you the image tag in the PowerPoint and basically in the book, they also have what they call an alt tag. And then I'm also seeing they have a height and a width attribute. So we're going to add those pieces in one at a time. And then I'm going to show you what I think is the correct way to do it. So the first thing is we will add the alt tag, and then it comes with an equal sign and a pair of double quotes. And then I'm going to put in some words, a picture of a cloud X. And I think it was contrails, you know, I'm not sure how you spell contrails, something like that, contrails. And you notice what I'm doing, the alt tag is very descriptive. It describes what you're looking at, okay, and why the alt tag is important. The first thing is, if you're doing HTML5, the alt tag is required for all your images. If you decide that you got no words to say because it's like a decorative thing, you can actually delete the words inside and leave it blank, but it's still got to be there. Otherwise, the validator will yell at you, right? When you do put the words in, the words inside the alt tag will appear if the image doesn't load. So I'm going to give you an example by breaking my link, right? So I'm removing a letter from my link, saving it, and I come here and refresh, and notice what pops up. The image doesn't pop up, but the alt tag words pop up. So it's helpful if your alt tag says what the picture is. And you can see a picture of a cloud X contrails in the sky, you know, pretty descriptive. Now I'm going to fix it, right? Because we do want the image. So saving and refreshing. The other aspect of the image that is pretty important, right? So like when I came here before and I just hovered over it, and you notice how the dimensions pop up, and notice the numbers, 800 by 450. So that indicates that it's 800 pixels wide, 450 pixels tall, right? The other way to get that info is you can right click. In Windows 11, you do a properties. If properties doesn't appear, go to show more options and then click properties. And then you can also click the details tab here, and that will also tell you that information. Interestingly, when a photograph is taken, and this is not a raw photograph because I've altered it, but this one is. And if I look at the properties and then look at the details, and this is really kind of bizarre, it tells you all the details of the photograph, and check it out. Right? I don't know if you guys can read this or not. It tells you what the camera was that took it on the original photograph, the f-stop, the exposure time, the ISO settings, yada, 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 yada. And then if your GPS stuff is turned on your phone, which mine is, it tells you the exact location on planet Earth where it was taken and the altitude. How do you like that? This is how people, by the way, like they post stuff on social media and then they get burned, like if they're trying to hide or something, because they take a picture, they post it, and the picture has all that information embedded in it, and they found you, right? So if you're trying to hide, you're just giving yourself away, right? But you notice that when I made a copy of it and changed the size, that information was gone, right? And by the way, there are tools that allow you to tweak that information if you get really paranoid about it, right? Well, actually, it is still there. Some of it is, right? Not the GPS coordinates, though. All right. So, all right, let's go back to that concept, though. I'm looking really for those dimensions, 800 by 450. So here in the slide, they have 100 by 100. You would have to, if you're including those, and I'm going to caution you on this, you don't always need to include those, right? So technically it should be width equals 800 and height equals, what was that, 450, right? And if I save that, go back to the browser and refresh, you will see absolutely no change. Now, what this is doing, by the way, is it is reserving the space on the screen for the image in exactly those dimensions. Have you ever gone to a web page, particularly on your phone, and it's taking a while for the images to load, and you're reading something, and then all of a sudden the image loads and it moves all the words out of the way or something? You ever have that happen to you? You know, that's a pretty common thing. The effect is partially because the people did not include this information on the image. The other thing that I'm going to point out, that some people use these settings, for example, and I'm just going to do it on purpose here, to change the size of the image. So I can do that. I can put different numbers in here, right? And notice I didn't take any time to make sure the numbers were proportional. And then as I refresh it, look what happens. That was a pretty good guess because it still looks pretty good. But sometimes what people do is they'll change the one dimension, not change the other one accordingly, and then the image starts to get skewed and stretched. Now you can kind of use that for an effect at times, but I'm starting to notice that this isn't natural anymore. So whenever you're changing the dimensions of an image, what I always tell people is your best course of action is not to change the image using these. If you wanted a different size, go back to the original source image and resize it to what you need, and then use that image in your web page. That's my recommendation. I know people will not listen to that, and they'll take that full-blown image and just change the dimensions with the code. And just to kind of demonstrate that, I'm going to put in the full-size image now, the original one. Let's see if I can invoke the images. This is the original one, and I'm not going to like resize it or alt tag it or anything like that. I just want to show you the difference, right? So here's the original one, and this is what happens. Notice, not very practical for a web page at all, right? But I could, for example, put in the same width and height on that original image, save it, refresh it, and now I have two of them that are identical, except this one's only 60K or whatever it was, and this one's 4 megabytes. So when I do a hard refresh, I mean, you can kind of see it on the screen. Notice that the top one is instant and the bottom one kind of fills in. Catch that? Right, maybe you're not seeing it on Zoom so well. The video should show it pretty clearly. When the images are even larger, and some people have much higher quality cameras on their phones than I do, or they're pulling a straight one off of digital and it's like 10, 20 megs, that draw of the picture will be really slow. One of those on a page, okay, not a big deal. A bunch of those on a page, really, really slow performance to be avoided, right? Not everybody's got high-speed internet that's really, really high speed, right? So this is not what you want to do, but I thought I would demonstrate it just so you guys could kind of see that effect, right? So I'm gonna remove that one, but there's an example of getting an image on the page. All right, I know we haven't made a lot of progress in the slides, but we're talking about a lot of really important and heavy stuff, right? All right, so some of this is going to be a little bit of repeat here, right? We have to use the alt tag, right? So it is really designed to provide information, also makes your images more searchable, by the way, right? You don't want to put the file name of the image in there. You want to actually describe what the image is. If the image is just a decoration, it's like, you know, design or something weird like that, you can just put it in there blank, right? All right, so that's the one recommendation. The other thing that you can do, by the way, is you can take an image and you can put anchor tags around it and make it clickable. Now that sounds pretty cool, right? And this little technique here, I'm going to say this is probably outdated now, but in the old days, if you were using Internet Explorer and you put links around your image, sometimes it would put a blue border around your image. And if you ever get that effect, this is how you get rid of it. Right? That we should not be seeing that at all at this point anymore. Now, another kind of common technique, right, is sometimes you take a really small image and you use it to link to a bigger image. So I'm going to demonstrate that technique right now. All right, so let's refresh the main page here. I got rid of that one image, so I'm going to change that. And so here, I'm going to do a couple of line breaks to kind of push the images down. And then I'm going to first drop in the image. And what I'm going to drop in is the smaller one that I created. So you see there's kind of a little bit of method to my madness here, right? With the small one. We'll put in our alt, and I'll say thumbnail of X in the sky, right? I'm not sure what the size is, but I can add that later. All right, let's get it to show on the page first. So here it is coming up on the page. That's my thumbnail, right? Now I'm going to make this clickable. So around that image tag, I'm going to wrap an anchor tag, a link tag with my href. And what I'm going to link to is the full size image. And then I'm going to take this closing link and I'm going to put it at the end here. And then I'm going to put it all in one line. That's just me. Like that. Saving. Now watch what happens to this as I click on it, right? So I'm going to refresh. Notice how this is clickable now. See how the pointer changes from an arrow to a finger? And when I click on it, I can go to the full screen version. So this is what they're demonstrating in the slideshow here, where you can take a small image, you can make it clickable, and then you can go to the big image. So you don't have to basically pollute your page with all the big images, but here, this is full resolution. Notice my pointer over the image is a magnifying glass. So if I click it, I can go to full high def on it, like every little pixel that it is. But this is kind of a nice little technique to go from thumbnail to full size and be able to go back. Or you can just make it one size, put it on the page and just move on, right? But the point is you can make an image a link, and that's kind of cool, right? If you're doing a website and maybe whatever you're working on has a logo, often what web designers do is they make the logo a link to go back to the homepage, right? Or if it happens to be a Detroit Lions helmet, maybe it could take you to, you know, the NFL page on the Detroit Lions. I'm just putting it out there, you know, just as an idea. So images can be links too, and it doesn't have to go to a bigger image. It can go to a different website or a different page or whatever. You know, you're basically whatever your imagination allows and your skills allow you to do. One thing, and and I've been saying this kind of all along, right? There's this balance that you have to find between basically a beautiful image that looks good on the web page and one that's way too big, either in file size or dimensions, to be on the page. And it takes a little bit of work sometimes to optimize the images. The other thing that I generally find, and I don't usually demonstrate this in class, is that when you're taking images of objects and you're putting them on the internet, I tend to find that I have to brighten them to make them look good on the web compared to like just looking at them as an image. There's tools out there that you can use. You notice that I just used the built-in picture preview tool inside of Windows. I didn't use any fancy graphics tools, but if you want, you can start playing with some of these graphics programs. And I think that what would be a really good thing to do right now is, we are going to probably take another break here, but we'll talk a little bit about these products when we come back. So let's take another break, and let's make this like maybe more like a 10-minute break. So we'll come back at 8 o'clock. So I'll see you guys in 10. All right, so we're back from our break, and we're going to start talking a little bit about different image editors, because it really becomes pretty pertinent. Because if all you do is even just resize images, you can use the preview tool on a Mac, or the Windows equivalent. I don't know really even what they call this piece of software, honestly. Probably photo preview or something like that, but it does have the resize tool, and sometimes that's about all you really need, honestly, to mess with an image. Same thing is available on a Mac OS, by the way, right? But sometimes you want to use some higher end tools, and if you have it available, and most people won't, because at this day and age, most people cannot afford it. And that is to have a subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud. And I'm firing up Photoshop right now because I happen to have it, right? And I do have the whole Creative Suite. But when you do get out into the workplace, and I just want to have you guys have a heads up about this, Photoshop is still king. Like Microsoft Word is still king for documents, Photoshop is still king for images. And it is the most powerful graphics tool out there, hands down, bar none, right? And the one that professionals use. And you can see even from the little video that's playing in their demo screen, the kind of crazy stuff you can do with it. If you know what you're doing, you can really do some pretty amazing things if you're aware. And I love watching these little demos and stuff too. Okay, so I'm gonna not necessarily do any work in here, but if you were tweaking a photograph, and I'm just gonna, okay, so that's been moved. All right, so that's not good. But there are images that we've worked on for websites, and of course, all the ones I'm going to click on probably aren't there. All right, so never mind. But I thought I'd bring up a couple of examples of ones that we worked on. But Photoshop is kind of a much better tool overall, but it does cost money. It is expensive. If you're interested at all, and I just say this real quickly, you can go to Adobe and search Creative Cloud, and you can try a trial, and however, there are, and this is the version I use. I get all the apps, but I do not pay that price. There is an educational price, notice students and teachers. And right now, if you're a student, you can get it for $20 a month, and it includes a ton of products. There is a free trial. I think it's maybe 30 days. And you also get 100 gigs of cloud storage and a bunch of other like crazy stuff to go with it. When the introductory price expires, it goes up to like about $35 a month. And that might be too expensive for some people. I get it. So a lot of people don't opt to buy this because it does cost a lot of money, right? If you're working professional though, and you're using Photoshop all the time and you're making money with it, that's a drop in the bucket. It's hardly anything, right? And it's continuously updating. And if you look at what products are are included. You know, Photoshop, Acrobat, Premiere, Illustrator, Adobe Express, Adobe Firefly. This is their new AI image generator, by the way, which is amazing, amazing product. But here's all the different plans and products. And if you get the whole subscription, you get all of it with it. You know, there's audio tools, video tools, animation tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And probably arguably the best web editor, which is Dreamweaver, which I have right down here on my toolbar. And I'm not going to really dig into it this week, but maybe like next week and beyond, I'll start working with it. This is Dreamweaver. And I think I tinkered with it a little bit last week and showed you guys. So I'm just showing you the product. All right, I'm going to close all that stuff. I did want to make special note, though, that the author points out a bunch of stuff and recommends a couple of other tools. There's this one tool called GIMP, and I'll just bring that up in the browser too. This is what we call the free version of Photoshop. I think it works on all platforms. I do find it a little clunky, but a lot of people love it, right? And if you can't afford Photoshop, this might be a go-to. It is a download and an install, and it works on all the major platforms: Mac, Windows, and Linux. If you don't want to install anything, there's other tools. So there's tools like Pixlr, which work in your browser. I'm a pretty big fan of this one, right? They also have AI tools built in now. And most of the time, if you're doing like just really quick little tweaks, you can use Pixlr Express. If you're doing real deep adjustments and actual drawing and stuff, you could use the editor. What's kind of neat about the products is that they just work basically, you know, inside your browser. You don't have to install anything. It's that quick to get into it, right? And you can do most of the kind of tweaks that you want. Okay, yeah, there's ads, but hey, that's the price of free. I can live with an ad. I'm not paying any money. The other thing that we have, and I just want to point this out too, because you guys probably heard about it at the beginning and then forgot about it, is in the course shell. If you go to the resources page, course resources on the left sidebar here, I have a listing of software recommendations. And not only do I have recommendations for coding tools and FTP software, but we also have recommendations for graphics tools. Some of them are web-based, some of them are downloadable. So you can see GIMP and Photoshop. Those are I'd say the top downloadable ones. And then if you're looking for web-based tools, I just showed you Pixlr, but here's a couple of others that you guys might want to try. I also don't want you to forget that there's the Google Drive image editor that's built into Google Drive. So that's pretty good for basic stuff too. But there's these two platforms which are design tools that I've seen a lot of web developers using. And I'm just going to kind of pull up one of them. And ideally, you want to build an account, right? So I'm just going to log in with my school account here. And then once you get in here, they have all these like kind of graphic presets. If you're like generating content from scratch, you can go in there and start creating all sorts of interesting items, right? And I don't want to get too deep into this, but I would encourage you to explore Figma as a platform, and I would also encourage you to explore Canva. They're kind of similar. So you can do, like, when it comes to like wireframing a website or taking like logos and building logos, or taking an image and changing it somehow, these are awesome tools. And once again, web-based, they work in the browser. You don't have to install anything, and they're free. And a lot of people are doing design work, everything from designing like what apps look like to creating, you know, images for web pages or professional logos or what have you, with these two products in particular. They've really gained a lot of traction. So those are my recommendations. If you want to start digging into the IDEs too, feel free. I'm going to do this more next week, by the way, and probably the weeks beyond. But those are some tools. The author points out some. Also, they talk about like how you choose file names for your files. Generally what they're saying is a short name's not really good, a super long name's probably not really good, but something like that might be just about right. I'm going to be real frank. I don't think it matters what you call your files. I think that when you name a file, it makes sense to name it kind of what it is. And then I also kind of mentioned that a lot of times what I do is when I name files, I sometimes do things like I indicate if it's small or medium or large, or put the dimensions in, or if it's black and white or whatever. I put that in the file name. So when I look at it in the folder, I just know. I don't have to guess. Right? To me, that's pretty helpful. Another thing that they start pointing out, I did this a little bit earlier, is whatever folder you're working within, it's a good idea to create a separate folder for images. Why? Because it's not unusual to have a ton of images on a website. I've done websites, for example, where I had 10, 20, 30,000 images for one website. I don't want those all in my root folder. It makes sense for them to be in their own folder. In fact, it might make sense to have separate folders for even different types of pictures, like, family photos, dog pictures, house pictures, whatever, but putting them in a folder sure makes a lot of sense in the long run for organizing things. And so what they're typically recommending for a website, and this is a very typical structure, is that your HTML and CSS files are in the root folder, and that you have a separate folder for images. And then maybe if you have a lot of videos, you could have a videos folder, or if you have music, you could have a music's folder, that type of thing, right? And that's just kind of a little bit of a preference, ultimately. Now, there's a whole bunch of other tags they start throwing in here, by the way. And some of these I am not going to demonstrate. I'm just going to talk about them, and you can feel free to experiment with them. The reason why we're talking about them is when HTML5 came around, by the way, they added a bunch of new tags. It wasn't just that like header and footer and nav and main and article and aside and section, if you remember any of those. They also came up with weird ones like this. So like, for example, like you would have a figure, meaning like an image usually or a drawing, and then you would have a caption underneath it, creating basically something like this, an image with a caption, right? And they created the figure tag, which holds all of it. The image goes inside, and then the caption goes at the bottom, right? And that's a new thing for HTML5. And I think that can be useful. I personally haven't used it a lot when I've created stuff, but hey, it's out there. Here's another one that's kind of weird. And you could, if you want to experiment with these, and I'm not requiring you to, you can actually take this code and copy it and just drop it on your page and see what it looks like. And basically what it looks like is this, right? But the new tag is meter. And what it does is it sets up a numeric range with a minimum and maximum and prescribed value. And then it creates these little bars and it fills them in, right? So these are kind of cool. So if you're putting like stats up on the screen to show them visually, you can also tie these components into JavaScript. So when you have live data that feeds the values, you can actually dynamically change it with JavaScript. So I think, in terms of like what we're doing here, unless you have a reason to use this, kind of cool, but functionally not a lot of purpose unless you're doing something like this, right? All right, if you're maybe doing a football site and you want to like count like the number of touchdowns or whatever, I'm just giving you ideas, Juan,
Oh, quick question though, with that, for example, that meter element, now with Java, is it able to do like live updates? Or is that something you have to?
You need some back-end programming,
Yeah.
and you need a live data feed.
Yeah.
Those are more advanced skills, but yes, it's completely feasible and possible. Absolutely.
Cool.
Another one that's real similar is the progress bar, and you can see the syntax for that one, right? So you can, it's very similar to the meter tag, by the way, but you know, if you want to play with it, copy the code, drop it on your page. You'll see it's very easy to deploy. All right, so those are kind of some interesting tags. And yeah, they're kind of visual, but I'm not really too concerned about them unless you have a functional reason to use them. But now we're getting to one that actually does have, I think, a lot of purpose and helpfulness. And that is, well, hey, we learned how to put backgrounds on things using colors. But oh my God, did you guys know that you could use images? Yeah, now that's kind of cool. And I'm going to do just a really quick little example here by taking a look at my current layout of my page and going, where could I put an image as a background? And I'm thinking of a couple of spots, and this is what catches my eye. So maybe your eyes will be different. But this like sidebar area, that could be an image instead of just a color. Or the whole background of this header could be an image. And I think that's where I'm going to go first. And I was a little bit strategic, and I was like, during the break, I downloaded some stuff, right? And I'm trying to remember what I downloaded. So I grabbed some, these are all images that I took, by the way. There's my dog. There's this is Arkansas. Got a few of those. There's the dog again, right? Those are my friends, never mind. All right. And all right, I think I'm going to go with this one for right now. And I'm going to try to use it as a background on that header. We'll see how that works out. But there it is. So this is, I don't know, what does it say? 43,521, right? So 43,521, that's that first one there. I'm just going to copy that one. I'm going to go back to my image folder here and paste it in. I'm thinking it probably needs to be resized. Let's go ahead and just open it with the preview tool. And once again, I'm at 43%. So it's not super huge, but it's big enough. So I'm going to resize it. I'm not sure to what. So I'm going to make it, I'm more concerned with the width. I want it to be fairly wide. So I might go with like a width of 2000. And yeah, I'm going to go with a width of 2000. All right, so let's do that. And then it's going to want a different name. And I'm just going to call it, I don't know, wait, oh, this is a sunrise, actually. Sunrise Lake. All right. So now I have it named. It's in my folder, and I'm going to try to use it as a background. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. And what I really want to do is apply it as a background to this header. So I'm going to find my header styles here in the CSS. And so right now I do have a background color. So I'm actually going to mute that. I'm going to comment it out, right? Deactivate it. And then I'm just going to type background. And I do want to point out, like, background is one of those that has the multiple styles in one line thing. And you'll notice here, I could choose background image, right? And in fact, let's just do that, background image. And then we're going to say URL. And then I put the name of the file in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to images, and we'll pick that one, and we're going to save it. And I know I'm moving kind of fast here, so I'm just kind of pausing on it for a second, so you guys can grab it or copy it. And then I want to go back to my browser and refresh because I'm dying to see what it looks like. And there you go. All right. Now that's not the part of the picture I really wanted there, but I do have it, right? Okay. Not a great background. I don't know if it's too big, too small, but it's not the right layout or format for sure, right? Let's try something else. Let's try maybe, and I'm just kind of thinking here in this preview tool, right? Could I edit Yeah, and see, I don't have the kind of tools here that I want. So this is what I would normally do is I would bring up Photoshop, and I'm just going to demonstrate this, right? Because you can do this with other tools as well. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the original source file from my downloads. And I think it was this first one. So here it comes up. And I'm not sure if it's still doing it. It's still doing it. Okay. It's just moving really, really slow. And I don't want to use this right now. Not right now. Thank you. All right. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a portion of the image that I actually want to use, which is more like kind of this part. A little bit of the ground, a little bit of the sky, a little bit of the tree, right? And then I'm going to actually crop my image to just be that, right? And then I'm going to export this. And I'm just going to do it as a PNG really quick. And I'm going to put it in that correct spot. Okay, so I named it differently. Now I'm going to go ahead and try to pull that one into that background. So let's see what that will end up looking like. So back to the code. And all I really need to do is just change which file we're pointing to and then watch the refresh. All right, it's still kind of weird, right? It's still kind of too big. So what I really need to do is I need to figure out what the actual dimensions are, but you kind of get the idea, right? So I can take an image and I can throw it in the background or something. And if I plan it correctly, I can get a really cool effect. I'm not necessarily liking this right now, but I'm going to just stick with it for the moment, just to kind of keep playing on the concept. You can put images in the backgrounds of just about any object on the screen, but you don't want to go like background happy, right? Like, so for example, like the body section here could use a background, and that would put a background behind everything. And I'm not sure it would be a good background for something like this. And I'm thinking maybe an image of, I don't know, the ocean, right? And I don't know, I think that many of these could potentially work, right? So you kind of feel where I'm going with it. This might not be the most optimal design choice, but I'm trying to find one that I think will work, right? And try to find one ideally that's free. Probably none of them are. So this one says free pick on it, but it is licensable. I'm just going to copy it. This is for academic purposes, not to make money off of it. And notice, oh man, that's like a weird file format. So no, that's not going to happen. All right, let's try this one. And I'm going to put it right in the folder where I want it to be. And I'm going to name it something else like ocean water. All right, so now let's try to pull that up as a background to the body. And so this time, instead of saying background image, I just want to show you that you can actually just say background, by the way. And you can still put in your URL. And I'm going to pull up that particular one, which is this one. We're saving it and let's be brave and take a look, and hopefully it looks okay. And honestly, it could look horrible. This is kind of horrible, I think. But here's kind of the ideas here, right? You can take stuff and put it in the background and create some pretty dramatic effects, if it suits your materials. Now, the other aspect of this, and I'm just telling you this up front, is just because you can do it doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it. You know what I mean? And in this case, you can tell that this image is got like watermarks on it, so it's probably not a good one to use. And I probably have my own personal images that are better, but I'm just kind of thinking, it's an island, there's water, so like maybe water would be a good background, and I'm just kind of putting it out there. So maybe if you're doing a football site, maybe you can have a football field or fans, or who knows, right? I'm just kind of throwing ideas out there. So your topic will often dictate what kind of images look good. I'm not saying that this looks good. This is for demonstration purposes. I will get into it when I start to take my site and I get really serious about the content, and I'll try to make it look really, really good. Right now, all demo, basically. All right. Now, some interesting effects happen when you start using images as backgrounds. And the one aspect, and this is kind of hard to demonstrate, is that when you put an image in a background, it has this weird tendency to repeat automatically. And it's not a tendency, it's actually by design. And what they're trying to demonstrate here, if I had this image that had a little blue bar on the left and a lot of yellow space on the right, and it's only really short, it's not very tall, but it's very wide, and I put it on my background, it will repeat automatically top to bottom like this and fill the whole page with that particular type of background. That's really kind of a weird effect. If I have a small rectangular image that I'm using for a background, if I put it on there, it will repeat to the right and to the bottom. And I think maybe the best way to demonstrate this is to pull up one of my alternate pages here, like maybe my about page, right? And I don't even remember what's on my about page. So let's go take a look at that first. So what's on there? Not a lot. Okay. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to build out this middle section here a little bit, and then I'm going to put in a repeating background, and I'll use some really kind of ugly little snippet of image just as an example. So let's So I'm trying to find ones here that I can just borrow. Like maybe this is a good one. So I'm going to copy this image. And it's going right into the folder. That sounds great. Let's try that one. This one's called 1035 PNG. And so here on the About page, I'm going to create a background for the container. And I'm going to do something really super goofy here. I'm going to make the container a little bit taller first by putting in a whole bunch of line breaks. Right, that's really kind of a goofy technique, but I'm just going to show you that it does work. So I'm going to save this. Let's go back to the browser for a second. Take a look, refresh, see how it's taller. Now I'm going to put a background in here. And like I said, this isn't necessarily a good design choice. This is for demonstration purposes. And so I'm going to put a background on the main container here that we're working with. But that's only going to be, well, actually, I got to be careful about this. I'm going to give this a class, and I go BG example. All right, just to give you an example. I don't want to put it on every page. I just want to put it on this one. So I'm going to apply the style to the background example. Let's go back to the code, And let's just put it right here. So okay. And then we'll do this same syntax. Oops. Got to be inside those curly brackets. And then I'm going to just kind of backspace here and then get it to re-invoke the panel. And then before I run this, by the way, I do want to show you that in the images folder, if I open this up, that's all that it is, right? So it's not really huge. All right. But watch what happens when it comes up here. Yeah, save it first. So let's go back and save. Yep, never saved it. Okay, watch the refresh. And what is happening? Okay, so we have a conflict here somewhere. All right, I gotta look at my code here, folks. Doing it a little too hastily, and that's what happens. We're on the about page. I'm trying to put it in this container. I gave it a class. Does a container have a background that's overriding it? I think that's what's going on. All right, so let's the container doesn't, the main does, and I want you to notice that that is happening here. I'm going to blot out this background. That might be what's doing it. So let's go back and refresh. There we go. All right. There's a thing of not beauty, by the way. But here's the big takeaway. The actual image I'm putting here is only this big, right? If I just put it on the page and don't give it any specifics, it will repeat to the right. It will repeat to the bottom until it fills the whole space. And it happens, by the way, automatically. And that's what these slides are about. So if I use a little square, it repeats to the right, it repeats to the bottom. But you can, if you want, you can control it. So I can tell it instead to repeat Y, which means going down. I can tell it to repeat X, which means going across. I can tell it not to repeat. So I just get one of them and it can just sit in the corner. And we can control that. So what this real image shows here is what the original image is. And then if I add like this little extra bit to it, so I'm going to demonstrate that really quick, right? So up here where we did the repeating, or we put the image in, and I'm going to get rid of the image part of it. I'm going to say background, and then inside here, I'm going to say repeat X. So let's see what that one looks like. This is a repeat X. Just goes across. Weird, right? Here's repeat Y, saving, refreshing. That goes the other way. Strange. I know it's strange, right? But you might find reasons to use this stuff. So some of it is really just kind of dependent upon, you know, the time you're trying to put into it. This is just a natural repeat. I'm not saying it looks good. I'm just showing you it's possible. All right. And that's kind of an interesting one too. All right, let's keep moving on. When you are using repeats, you can, once again, do these separately. So I can say background repeat, no repeat, background image as a separate thing, or you can combine them like I was doing here. So I can just get rid of the specifics here and just add the extra controls here. Background is one of those that works with that. There's also a positioning property that you can throw in. So for example, on this one, I have an H2 where I can put in a background image, position it on the right, not repeat, and it just throws this little thing over here in the corner. That's kind of cool, right? So you might, you know, I don't know, thinking of the football page again, right? You could say Detroit Lions, and then you could have a little helmet over on the right. That's kind of neat, right? That could work. All right. Another kind of interesting little thing here is that you have basically this other property called background clip that basically determines the parameters of how far the background fits, right? So I want you to notice when you set background clip sent to content box, it matches whatever the actual contents are. If you set it to the padding box, it fills the inside of the border. If you set it to border box, then it actually extends to include the border in the background. So like the dashes here fill in with the image too. I don't use this one a lot, but just pointing it out. Right. Another kind of thing, once again, is the same kind of thing. So content box, padding box, and border box, where they have this new property called background origin. And you can see if I set it, it's like, where exactly is it sitting? Is it sitting inside the box, like over the border, inside the border, or away from the border with a little padding on it, right? And these are all like really particular little design choices that you might make. So just keep those in the back of your head that it is a possibility. Another thing that's kind of interesting is you can also trigger what we call background size, which configures an image. Now, this is kind of the effect I was sort of going for on that one background image. And maybe if I change the background size of that image, I can get it to sit better. And notice how like 100%, 100%. And basically what that does is it makes it fit even though it's stretching. So maybe I try that on my header. So let's do that. All right, so here I'm going to add another one that says background size, and I'm going to try 100%. I can find the percent key at 100%. Let's save that. Back over to the page and refresh. And there you go. Now I have that sort of sunrise effect. It is stretched, right? So I know that it's stretched, but it does look a little better, right? At least I can read the words now, you know. And so this is one of those things you can play with for hours to find just the right effect. And it's okay. It's actually part of the fun of it, you know. When you start to get an idea in your head and like what you can do with it, it gets kind of cool. It is also possible, and this is kind of a weird concept, that you can have multiple background images, but you have to be careful how you lay them. So what they're really kind of showing you as an example is that you can have like one image sitting in the background that maybe occupies the whole space, and then another image that sits in the background like in the corner. That's kind of cool too, right? Do you need to do that? Once again, no, not really. Just showing you that it's possible. I would call those probably more advanced skills in terms of getting it to work, but certainly worthy of knowing. All right, I'm going to move on to some more topics here, and hopefully we can get through all of these before we leave here tonight. That would be helpful, at least for our progress, especially since next week will probably be a slightly shortened class. Here's some other concepts, and some of these I am going to talk about very quickly and just kind of move on. I'm going to introduce you to the concepts, not necessarily ones that we use, but I want you to be aware of them. The first one is an image map. An image map is kind of this thing that we used to do a lot in the old days before we had the power of CSS, right? And so here's kind of like basically how an image map works. Like, for example, if I want to take an image and put it on the screen and then make a portion of it clickable and link to something, I can do that, but I have to be able to define the polygonal origin points within the image. And so for an example of how to do this, I can declare what the shape is, and then I declare the XY coordinates of the clickable zone within the image, right? And then I can attach a link just to that particular thing. Kind of a weird thing to do. But in the old days, real frankly, what we used to do is we used to create images of menus before we had CSS to do it with. And we would make it an image map. So we'd have like a home button and we'd make it look all cool, and then about and gallery and whatever. And they would all be an image map. Now, this still exists because there's still some usefulness for this, but for like menus, we don't do it anymore. Where it gets useful is like, think about this. Like you go to a website and they'll say, hey, what state do you live in? And they'll throw up a map of the US, and there's a bunch of little image map points where you can click on Wisconsin and it takes you to Wisconsin. You know, that's where it could be kind of useful. Another one that I think is very useful and cool, and you'll get to do this in your case study, by the way, is this thing that we call the favorites icon. And now, you know, this version of it, how you pronounce it is up to you. I hear most people say favicon. I still say favorites icon because that's what it is. But basically what a favorites icon is when you're in the browser and you declare what the little icon is in the tab. Notice on a page that we created, we didn't declare one. It just puts up this generic little earth. But on the other websites, like Adobe's got one, and W3's got one, and GIMP's got one, and Google certainly has one, and it makes your tab more identifiable. If I was doing a football team, if I was doing the Green Bay Packers, it'd probably be the Green Bay Packers G or a helmet or something like that, right? That would look pretty cool. So you have to begin by having the right image, right? And the image is usually named in this format, right? And then we put this code in the head section of our document, right? You have to have the image file to go with it. And here's kind of the trick to this, by the way. You know, like when it all works out, you get this cool little icon up there, but you often need to create these. There are, and I'm not going to do a full demo on this right now, but you can just do this search, right? So there's generators that allow you to take images that you like. So maybe you have a logo for a football team and you drop it in here and it converts it into like an appropriate size and type of file, and then you just download it and add it to your website, right? I will not recommend any of these because the last time I tried one of them, it wasn't really quite a great experience. I'll just give one a try really quick. Yeah. So so this is one of those tools. I'm not probably too crazy about this one. All right, and I think this is probably the approach you want to use, right? And so if I had an image, and I'm going to struggle to find one here, of course, because I didn't pre-plan this. But maybe I could use Homer as my favicon. But maybe I could take this here, and let's see if I can just pull it into the browser. All right, it seems to have done it, and there you go. So I have a little potentially Homer favicon that I created here. I'm going to copy this. I am going to put it in my folder, but I'm not putting it in my image folder, by the way. That one I'm actually going to put in the root. So I'm going to put it down here. And then I'm going to basically borrow the code from the slide, right? If it's text, and it is. So I'm just going to copy that. And I'm going to add it to my code. And once again, that's going to go in my HTML file. And it's going to go in the head section. And I'll put it right below the style sheet link, like that. Save it. Now this is only going to appear on my index page. Let's go ahead and just launch the index page. But if you can see that, that's hard to see, but I do have a little tiny Homer up there. Right. So that website that I went to actually worked pretty well. So that's favicon.io, favicon converter. I just dragged and dropped the image. I hit a download. It gave me a zip file with a bunch of different formats. Notice it has some for Android and Apple Touch devices, but the standard favicon will work in the browser. And I don't think that's animated. I'm looking at I don't think they animate up there, but you also notice that like the details of Homer are really kind of lost. So whenever you create one of those, you need kind of like an image that will scale down well and look clear, right? That's not a really good example, but I did get it up there. So that's how you do it. That is one of those things that you will be doing in the case study. And then when you're designing your final site, I think it's a really good idea. All right, a couple more concepts here, folks, and let's see if we can get through them. Sometimes people, when they're working with lots of little tiny images, they use these things called sprite sheets that contain lots of little images within them. And I'm just going to do a really quick little Google search on this, right, and go to the image area and just show you an example. These are what we call sprite sheets, where you see lots of little individual images in one image file. The concept is that instead of loading a separate image for every little image I want, I load the one big image once and then display the portion of the image that I want to show. Now, I will say that generally, I think this is a little bit more of an advanced skill, and people used to do this to save on download speed and stuff, but there is some work that we do with sprites in chapter 7. If you're interested, we're not going to cover it here. I'm just talking about it so you guys know that it's out there. Right. Where do you get your graphics from? This is the whole thing. I've been kind of demonstrating all along a bunch of different techniques. You can go to Google Images and search. You can go to a website and right click. Ultimately, I think that one of the best ways to get images for a website is to create them, you know, like either photographically or artistically. Or what you can do, and a lot of professionals do this, is they go to stock photo repositories and they pay a fee and grab the images they want that are really high quality, right? And that's not unusual. A lot of stuff is done with stock footage and stock images, right? For sure. All right, so once again, you can take pictures, scan stuff, scan your drawings, hire a designer, right? That's a thing. If you ever take on web work as a freelancer, by the way, and people want you to create graphics and images and logos and take pictures, that's an upcharge. You charge them more for that. Those are separate skills, by the way. They have a bunch of guidelines that they talk about here. Is, you know, they talk about, like, you know, if, for example, if you have multiple pages on a website, there's no reason why you have to have different images on every page. There's kind of this balance between image size, quality, and download speed. And I always say, like, be careful of how big they are and how long they take to download. The other thing they point out here is be aware of brightness and contrast. I often find when I'm working with photographic images on the web, and I'll go back to my little example page here, wherever it is. And, you know, like, for example, this photograph up here might actually be too dark. It might look better if it was brightened up. So those are things that you can adjust with good graphics programs, by the way. There's a lot of discussion about these days for web and accessibility. Like, for example, like, even when it just comes to typography, and I put like a blue font, like this is a blue font right here, right? That might not be the most optimal color for people to view on the web, especially if they're hard of seeing, right? There's always kind of this thought is be knowing of your audience. And, you know, so for example, if I was catering to older people, I probably wouldn't use really bright colors and colors that they might not see, like if they're colorblind. If I'm like building a website for kids, I might do the exact opposite. I might make it super colorful and crazy looking because the kids would probably be into it. It just kind of depends. So you have to know your audience a little bit. They always say provide a text equivalent for non-text elements. So in other words, they're talking about that alt tag again, where you should really describe what your image is. And it says if your site navigation uses image links, which I don't recommend these days, provide simple text links at the bottom of the page. We used to do that a lot in the old days, by the way. Okay, some other really kind of neat tricks, and I will demonstrate a little bit of this, but we are getting to the end of the PowerPoint here, so we're going to go for the home run here and finish it off. When you put boxes up on the screen, there is a way to soften the corners of them using this technique called the border radius. This is kind of an interesting technique. So I'm going to actually experiment with that one H2 that's on this page here. And you see I kind of broke this thing here, so I have to fix that too. So let's go ahead and fix that first. So I'm going to come back down here, and I think it was my container. No, my main had a different background color, so I'm going to get rid of that. Saving it. All right, let's just make sure that fixed. Okay, there it is. All right, and I'm going to apply a border radius basically to this box here. So watch how this happens. I'm going to actually copy that code. Pretty simple to do. And then we'll drop it here in the CSS. And that was, which object was that here? Oh, yeah. I called it blue bottom, right? But we ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff to it. So I'm just going to drop that in here. So I'm doing a border radius, and that means it'll have a 15 pixel swing on it. I'll save that. Let's go take a look. Here's the refresh. And you see how the corners are a little bit rounded. Right. That can be cool, right? Depends on what you're doing. It does give it a little bit softer look. It's not quite as like, angular or whatever. So that can be pretty useful little trick. What's kind of neat about it is border radius, like all the other ones, you can control each corner separately. So here's an example where one corner barely has any, one has a little bit like we just did, the other one has a little bit more, and the other one has a lot. And so you can actually use border radius to kind of create some really bizarre shapes when you really get into it. In fact, there are entire websites that show shapes that you can make with CSS commands. So and I think this website, for example, if you want to make squares, circles, ovals, triangles, I'm just going to kind of scroll really fast to see if you have the right CSS, you can create some really crazy stuff. And of course, the crazier the shape, the more code you have. But it's out there for the taking. I'm just putting it out there, right? If you want to create a weird shape, and this is actual like styling of an object in HTML using CSS. So you can do some really weird ones, right? And you can tell people put a lot of time into creating these. But yeah, it's totally doable. It's out there. It's for the taking. Just have to search it. All right, moving on. Here's another one I think that's kind of helpful. And they're applying this, by the way, to a whole website, but it's this property called a box shadow. Now, if you guys remember, we put a shadow on our text, and the syntax for a box shadow is very similar to the text shadow, where you have an X offset, a Y offset, the blur, and the color of the shadow. This particular one does this. So the box that the website's sitting in gets a shadow, and then it makes that box look like it's popping out from the screen. That could be kind of cool, right? I'm going to put that on that same H2. So I'm going to try that here. I'm going to do box dash shadow. And you know what? I'll use kind of the same values they did. I'll go 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 5 pixels. And then I'm going to put in probably, I don't know, maybe a little bit darker gray than that. So I'm going to make this gray maybe about there. All right, so see the color definition there. And then let's go back to the browser, find the page. I'm going to refresh. The shadow is going to pop in on this box. Here's the refresh. And there you see it. That's kind of neat, right? I mean, it makes the whole thing seem like it's coming out of the screen a little bit, and it really gives it some dimensionality. So I like that one a lot. I use this one quite a bit when I want to give it, you know, more than just laying flat on the screen. Here's another cool one, right? And I like this effect a lot. It's an effect called opacity. So in other words, if you have a background on something, I can set the opacity or the transparency of the object anywhere in a range of 0 to 1, 0 being 0%, 1 equaling 100%. So when I say opacity 0.6, that means it's 60% solid, not see-through, but 40% see-through. And they're putting it, for example, on this H1 here, and you can see what it does. It provides a background so you can kind of see the letters, but it's also transparent so that you can see the background through the background. Now, I could do that actually on my H1. So I could actually copy, I guess all of that. And let's just try it on one of my H1s. I don't know if, I think I only have one H1, so I could probably just put it here. Let's see, got a background color and an opacity. We're going to give it a shot, see what it looks like. Here we go. This is going to appear at the top here. So it's going to go behind these letters, basically. So here's the refresh. There you go. Once again, not the best aesthetic choice, but a demonstration of the principle. So I'm putting a background on something, but it's also see-through, and I can see the stuff behind it. I think that's kind of neat, right? I don't know if this is the best spot for it, but I see the effectivity of it, because if I have words that are kind of hard to read, having a little bit of a background on it helps. The other thing I could do is that even on a background like this, I could make this light colored background here kind of transparent so I could see the water, for example. That would be possible, right? These are things you're going to have to play with your own design, by the way, but kind of a neat effect. I think it looks pretty on point when you apply it correctly. All right, another thing that we're going to talk about, we've been playing with this already, by the way, is what we call RGBA color, right? And basically, when we started working with hex codes, if you remember, we were doing like, there's 2 digits that are red, 2 digits that are green, and 2 digits that are blue. And then when we start playing with Visual Studio Code and I choose a color, it usually drops it into RGB format, right? Which is red, green, and blue, right? That's the mix of colors, except they're not expressed in hex code. They're expressed with regular numbers between 0 and 255, right? This could also be a hex code, but here's the thing that's kind of bizarre about this is when I use, you know, okay, so actually here's a good example. This background is set to white, but let's say I choose a different color, you know, other than white, like that, right? Now it's doing it as a hex code, but you notice Visual Studio Code, I can switch between all the different color formats that are available by clicking on this title bar. This is kind of neat about this tool. So there's the hex code for it. Here's the HSL. This is hue, saturation, and lightness. Not a fan of it. Hue, whiteness, and brightness, or something like that. I forget what that one stands for. And then the RGB, which is becoming what I call the new standard. And that's red, green, blue. And I like this one a lot. And I'm going to go ahead and lock it in with the RGB, right? And then if you want, you can convert RGB to RGBA with that last A or last digit being opacity. A actually stands for alpha, and that's another way to say opacity in graphics program. And I just want to show you that I can put 0.6, which is the same as the opacity I was using here. And then when I go back and I refresh my page, it's still transparent. To show you that it's truly working, right? I could change this number, for example, down to like, I don't know, 0.4. And then when I come back and look at the page, watch how it's even more transparent than it was before. So transparency in the form of opacity can be a separate entry. If you use the RGBA color format, you can add the opacity here in the form of alpha, which is basically the same thing. I'm going to put this back at 0.6. I think that's a better setting. All right, so that's RGBA. And then the fourth value is opacity. I really like this approach a lot because it's easier than hex codes, right? And you know, real frankly, I mean, good programs will convert it for you anyhow. They do a little bit of a chart here and they show you like the comparison between like hex codes and RGB codes and how they correlate. And this is not anything you need to memorize or anything because most of it is automatic. If you use a good color picker will help you kind of denote which colors you're picking and what format you're choosing them in. Now you can apply that RGBA color to just about anything. Like before we took the words and we put a background behind the words and made that transparent. But you know what? I can also make the letters transparent. If I say font color and use RGBA and put opacity in there, I can make my letters transparent too. And that's kind of cool also, I think. You know, I could see a lot of usage for that. Another color format, and this is one that I don't see a lot of web people using, real frankly, but it is out there, is this other color mixing technique called HSLA. So it's hue, saturation, and lightness. So it's kind of like hue is basically which color on that color wheel. Saturation is how strong the color is. And then lightness is how bright it is. You know, so it's just a different way to mix colors, and that one also includes the alpha, so you can put opacity on it. Playing with the color tool here, it did bring up HSLA, so there's the mix for that. You know, that one I don't know so well, but functionally, if it does the same thing as RGBA, I'm not sure why I would switch to it. That's kind of my opinion. I'm just showing it to you because it is available. There are people that use it, but I see most web developers stick with RGBA, hex, or color naming typically, and let their color pickers do the work. There's this other color thing that designers do also, which are called gradients, right? And if you're not familiar with what a gradient is, it's when you have a color that transitions from one color to another. In the old days, if I was doing a website and I wanted to create this effect, I would go into Photoshop and use the gradient tool and then draw, like start with white and draw down to blue. And I could create that gradient in Photoshop, and then I would make it an image and I would import it into my web page and I'd have a background gradient. And then they were like, well, you know what? That's a whole lot of work to do that. Why don't we have a coding way to do it? So if you want, you can actually create using the background image declaration, you create a linear gradient, declare the starting and ending color, and CSS does it for you instead of using an image. The advantage of using this approach for doing a gradient is this is a command. It's just a couple snippets of text. It's barely a kilobyte of information. Whereas if I did an image, it might be 50, 60, 100K to create that same gradient. And really not the preferred way to do it anymore. You can do linear gradients and radial gradients if you're into it, right? And so I would say those are probably a little bit more advanced techniques, but if you want to try it, it's not really that hard to do, right? So you could take this code, drop it on a page and experiment with it and go, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool, right? But that's up to you to experiment with that one. And you know what, folks? That covers the chapter. We are done. which is great. So I'm going to stop the recording here.